I think progressions and regressions in exercises are the biggest, interestingly complicated word of life. Because I was always taught this, like, if you went like a back squat is a progression from a handstand.
Yeah.
Well, is it?
That's split squat, you start with front foot elevated, then floor, then rear foot elevated, then bulk.
Which I absolutely disagree with, but I totally agree.
You know, our goals and priorities change as our seasons of life change. And you know, and I think I know myself, like my goals are always changing. I've just finished a Crossfit Open, right, which is a 3-week competition, and the last 3 years, being competitive has not been on my radar at all. That's kind of like an old life to me. The last 3 years have been about surviving the pandemic, getting the business through, and training has always just existed, but it's not been the priority. I've pushed myself genuinely hard to the extent that I used to in a really long time. But I just did 3 weeks of CrossFit Open, and I'm like, I love that. I've missed the competition side. And I literally finished the last workout on Monday, and I'm like, I want to do a competition. Like, it's time for me to step out into physical discomfort, which I've avoided for so long because all my discomfort has been personal and professional. And that's been great. I've had so much growth in that area the last 3 years. But I've missed the physical growth. You know, doing a hard competition or doing some really challenging physical tasks. And I'm like now at a season of life. I never thought I'd get back here. I literally thought I'd kiss goodbye to competing a long time ago. And now I'm like, I want to do it again. I want to push myself harder. I want to stop being soft. I want to like put myself into the arena and see what I can actually do as a 35-year-old now. And that's a great example. Like in this season of life, it's just changed. And you know, working with our clients, they're always changing. And they're evolving. And the reason they come to you in the first place might be so different in 6 months' time. It might be different tomorrow. I think that's what we've got to do, to be constantly probing those questions, because I think it takes a very reflective individual to know really every day, every moment in time, what are their priorities and what do they really want.
We spoke about this at the start, about how much reflection we've done in our personal lives and therapy and things like this to find some of these things out. And it's I would say for anyone that's a particular client, anyone that's in Hong Kong wants to come to Coastal, come and work with me at HIT PT, like just come into this with the ability to go, right, I'm willing to communicate where I am, even though I don't know, and let's talk through this stuff. But I'm in that thing I spoke about earlier on about the menopause. The same thing's going on with training. I'm getting into that stage of life. I fought the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that everyone does for a long time. I went and spoke about classes today. I was like, no, I'm a bodybuilder for life. And it's now I'm in this position where I don't really know what I want for my training. I want to be less stiff. I've been left very tight and broken through partly bodybuilding, but also partly I think my structure just doesn't allow much thoracic extension. I'm just very, very stuck in English. My breathing has been a problem since I was a kid, hence why my dental is a big issue, hence why I couldn't blow up a balloon until recently, and a 32-year-old man. So I'm working through some of probably 20 years worth of bad programming from breathwork. And like now that is my priority. But it's also, for someone, I know a lot about mobility training, I know a lot about most form of training, but like you when you went into CrossFit, it's like, I know it, I could probably hold my own, but do I really know it? And this is like, now I'm like, where's my next step in training? Where's my new challenge? Yeah. I think that's quite interesting. And if I'm like that as a coach for 12 years that's done this, that shows that if training is not your top priority, you're going to go through many of these seasons, and that is fine.
Yeah.
Going into CrossFit and progress, because a lot of things is this, like when someone sees progress, this is how they get hooked on something. And you mentioned competing. How do you measure progress in CrossFit with your athletes?
Good question. I think the loophole, I would say the booby trap that people fall into, especially if they're more competitive, is using things like leaderboards as a means of dictating their success. Now the reason that's a booby trap is that the beautiful thing about this sport, and maybe the not so beautiful thing of this sport, is that the tests are always changing. Right? It's not like a marathon where you know the distance you're going to run. It's not like the decathlon where you've got 10 events and you know what each event's going to be. It's every single time you do a competition, the tests are going to change. So you never know.
And the individuals change. It's like, how do I compare my bench press to someone with a big rib cage and short arms?
Well, exactly. So it's the sport of constant variance. So if you're using something like the leaderboard, so let's just take the crossover, which has just happened here. Maybe last year you did 3 tests which worked perfectly in your favour. You know, you're someone who's better at pulling and pushing at test and pulling workouts. You're someone who's better at a 20-minute time domain than a 10 and had a 20-minute workout, and you finish really high up in the worldwide leaderboard. Then this year the tests come around and you get tested with all your weaknesses. Now you've come 10,000 places down the leaderboard. Now, a lot of people will take that, and I know this is happening because I'm seeing it happening everywhere right now, and they're going to say, what? I'm less capable, I've got less fit, I'm less strong. Basically, everything I've done in the last year has been a complete waste of time and I'm a failure. And actually, it's like, well, you can't really use the leaderboard as your determinant of success, because the test is always changing. And unfortunately, your place is dictated, like you said, by everyone else in the world. And if everyone else is getting better at a faster rate than you are, it doesn't mean you're not still getting better. It just means they're getting better faster than you, which means that's why you're on the leaderboard. So the basic way that I would typically do it, and it is a really hard question, but in the sport CrossFit, there are 1,000 different things you can be good at. And you can even say, okay, a snatch, for example. Okay, now, being good at a 1 rep max snatch, so lifting the most amount of load in 1 rep when you're fresh, is very different to lifting 20 snatches for time at 60% of your 1 rep max, which is very different to doing 20 snatches at 30 kg, rowing 20 calories and doing that 5 times. So even this classification of I want to get better at snatching, that could look a million different ways. And so, what we would do typically is like look at each individual metric and be like, are we seeing progress in these areas? So, for example, what's your 1K row time? Now, if you can improve your 1K row time every year, well then you're getting better at 1K rowing. You can obviously take this for every single movement.
So you test these in isolation? So
you would just test them in isolation.
Do you have like an assessment day or assessment session which is standalone from the workout, so you don't have the issue with overhead press into a row into something else interfering with things?
That's what's so hard about CrossFit, is there's always interference.
Yeah.
Right? And when I started programming for the sport CrossFit, I would try to control every variable. So I'd be like, how many pulling contractions with their upper body has this athlete done in a week? And I'm like, what's a pulling contraction? Like, is a toaster bar a pulling contraction? Is a power clean a pulling contraction? Is a ski erg a pulling contraction? Or is that a push? And it just got to the point where I was like, I can't control it. And this is just something you just kind of got to accept in the sport CrossFit. There's always going to be interference. But obviously, like even with powerlifting and bodybuilding, there's always going to be interference with outside life. You may control every variable in a training program, but like sleep could be shit, work stress could be high. Nutrition has changed. So anyway, I kind of digress a bit. But going back to CrossFit, you would test every single metric in isolation and basically chart, are we seeing progress? Now, what most people in CrossFit, the only thing they care about is their 1 rep maxes. So is my 1 rep max snatch going up? Is my back squat going up? Is my deadlift going up? Is my bench press going up? The thing is, when you get so fixated on 1 rep maxes, you forget that number one, CrossFit's an endurance sport. So your 1 rep max is not the most important thing, unfortunately, but it's a sexy stuff and it's on social media, right? So, okay, your 1 rep max might not have gone up, but you've got to be testing other metrics as well. So like, how many unbroken kick pull-ups can I do? How many unbroken handstand push-ups can I do? How far can I go in a handstand walk? How many meters of handstand walking can I do in 5 minutes? There's so many different things that you can do. The really hard part to all of this as a coach is that when you have a million things to try and get people better at, you cannot improve a million things at once.
You got a filter.
Exactly. And so really, like in a training cycle, so what we would typically do in terms of how I program is, again, let's say we're going to be starting a 6 to 8 week training cycle. And in that 6 to 8 weeks, our main priorities that we're going to try and create some adaptation for are going to be this. Maybe we're going to test, we're going to try and improve our bench press 3 rep max, our back squat 5 rep max, and our 1K row time.
And do you base that off preferences or structural balance or combinations of all the above?
Yes, it really, I'd say combination of all the above. I mean, if I was in an off-season phase, then I might use structural ratios as more of a determinant as to what we're going to focus on in the next cycle. If we are in like a sport-specific phase, if we're moving into a competition, then it might just be like, well, what are the tests we're likely going to see come up in the competition that you, Simon, are peaking for? So if you said, Ed, I just want to get really good and I want to be the best for this CrossFit Open. Well, I kind of know what tests are going to come up in the CrossFit Open, right? You're not going to need an assault bike, but you're going to be on a row. So we can take out assault bike training. We can take out running. They're not going to test that. In terms of dumbbells, the only dumbbell you're going to need as a man is going to be 2 50-pound dumbbells. So I can get rid of all the other dumbbells. We don't need to worry about those. You don't need to do rope climbs in the open. They don't get tested. You don't need to do GHC sit-ups. They don't get tested. Do you know what I mean? So for you, I can be even more specific. So I'm like, that's your goal, Simon. I need to get you at these things. But essentially, what we're doing is that we are looking at the demands of the sport, and the demand of the sport changes based on your level. So if you want to do the CrossFit Open, and you just want to do the scaled CrossFit Open, which is like the lowest level, the most accessible one? Well, we just simply look at all the data of what the last 10 years of CrossFit Open workouts as scale division looks like. So, okay, well, this is what you have to be able to do if you want to be able to excel in the CrossFit Open in scaled. Then we just take that, we look at where the athlete currently is, we talk about that roadmap, this is where you are right now, this is where you want to get to, let's design a training year that's going to get you to that point. Then we take someone like Ant, who wants to get to CrossFit Games, where it's like, you can be tested in anything. You know, like you might get asked to run a marathon with a sandbag on your back. You might get asked to do a 5,000 meter swim and then kayak 2,000. Like, how do you prepare for that?
You just look at the energy systems that he's probably needed and trying to develop them.
Exactly. And at some point in the year, just like, all right, well, now it's not about adaptation anymore. Now it's just getting you comfortable with everything. So now we're just going to drip feed little pieces of everything and just get you comfortable with it. As long as you've got the confidence on game day, if they show up, you know you've done that thing. At some point, you can pull it back in your memory. You're going to have a greater chance of excelling at it.
This is the thing that's made me realise like how similar different kinds of programming is as long as it's smart programming.
Yeah.
I'm sitting there just looking at how I progress in the bodybuilding coaching with sort of my class. You know, I go, right, when I pick up indicator lists or strength goals, let's say, I can either pick them, very similar to yours, I pick them either from the top down or what I call the bottom up. So the top down is, right, I want to get better at X and Y. This is where I'm not your structural balance ratios. What are your limits in this? I'm going to focus on deadlift and what upper body. So say a military press in this one. And then I pick the accessories that can help the A's and the tertiaries that can help the B's and help the A's.
Yeah.
But I can also pick them from the bottom up. So I'll go like, okay, we'll look at needs analysis. Let's look at your physique. What are the muscle groups that are going to make? Because you're always as big as your smallest muscle group. I always use my example. Like if you look at a picture when I'm shredded at my back, my triceps make my back look smaller, my back does not make my triceps look bigger. So in there, okay, so that's priority 1 on my needs analysis. What do you want? Well, I'd like big shoulders. Of course, that's priority 2 on the needs analysis.
Yeah.
What indicator lists are going to do that? Okay, maybe I'll have a floor press and an overhead press.
Yeah.
And then I work back down from what my more suited for hypertrophy.
It's essentially the same thing,
Yeah.
right? It's just that, you know, for us, we have very specific needs to sport. So, you know, like, if you want to be a world-class CrossFit athlete and that's your goal, then like you need to be snatching 125 kilograms. You need to be clean and jerking 150. You need to be back squatting 200. You need to be deadlifting 250. Like that's the bare minimum that men these days are doing. And so we just look at the athlete and we say, well, where is your back squat? Where is your deadlift? Where is your snatch? And essentially, I would take what we call like a limitation-based model. Like you just said, you're looking at the athlete from a physique perspective and being like, what is your biggest limiter that's preventing you from achieving high-level performance? I'm looking at the athlete exactly the same way. What are your biggest limiters that are stopping you? So what are your weaknesses in the sport? And so I might double down on those things and put everything else into maintenance mode. Okay, so we're going to drive up your back squat. We're going to drive up your overhead press. And that means things like your kipping chest to bars, your rowing, your running. We're just going to put those in maintenance mode, which basically means like I'm going to give you touches of them every now and then, but it's not a priority. So I need to then tell my athlete, don't expect to get better at chest to bar pull-ups, don't expect to get better at running, and don't expect to get better at rowing in this next 12 weeks because that's not the priority. And that's, you know, really big. I really believe in collaboration when it comes to training. That's something I've probably changed my mind on a lot recently. Not recently, I think over my last 14 years of coaching was that before it was like, cool, I've done the assessment, leave it to me, I'll give you a program on Monday. Now it's more like, well, let's work on this together. Like, what is it that you want? What do you like? What do you think your weaknesses are? What would you like to prioritize? Now, if you say that your quads are weak and you want to get those bigger, what do you love about quad training? You hate squatting? Maybe let's find another way. Let's go to a pendulum, let's go to a hack, let's go to a leg press, let's go to a leg extension. So kind of making it more of a collaboration always creates way more buy-in when it comes to starting the process. And I love that.
So there's something I teach in the first week of my mentorship. I go through psychology and adherence, and I talk Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the need for love and connection, the need for contribution. It's like the more you can, how I communicate with my clients has changed, how I program, how I make meal plans, how I do anything like this is now a collaboration effort.
Yeah.
It's like, right, we had this target last week, we haven't hit this, and by looking at the data, it's probably because of X, Y, and Z. What could you do to bring this up next week? Or when I want to make a change, it's like, cool, so we're going to make a change to nutrition, or we can either increase this much activity or drop this much food. I don't mind, which one do you want to do? There's ratings on it. I'm not saying do something different. It's like, we've got option A or option B. You're ultimately the driving force. And I had Andrew Coates on the podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Yeah, he spoke to me, he's a great quote. And I don't know if it's his or he's found from someone else, but it's stuck with me. That in a coaching process, if it's a Harry Potter book, our job is to be Dumbledore and our clients are Harry. We are the guide, but it's ultimately their story that they're telling. and it's not about us. I think that's a magical quote that really now I remind myself that everyone kind of getting into in my own head about programming, so, or anything in terms of the coaching process. Can I ask more questions?
Yeah.
What can I find?
So just real quick, I think about a quote all the time from John Berardi, he's a guy. He says, be a guide on the side, not a sage on the stage. And I always think about that. The sage on the stage is the person who's just up there, barking orders, telling instructions, here's what you've got to do. The guide on the side is the person who's, the guide, the collaborator. I think ultimately I always think about that in coaching, is that I want to give this person autonomy, ultimately. It's like, I'm not going to be here forever. I don't want you to rely on me forever. So if I can educate you in the process of of everything that we do, so that one day I can release you into the wild and you can navigate life and do your own transformations, and if you have specific goals, know how to work towards them, that's ultimately what I want to do.
And if they stay with you, how much more fun is it to program for that client who they can control their own diet, they're going to train on their own, they're going to train hard.
Two coaches who get to shoot the shit every day, who both know their stuff, that's a really enjoyable process.
100%. And then that's why I always that's why I love working with coaches these days, because it's like there's this natural curiosity about what they want to do, and that's essentially what I want to try and get to my clients. I always bring this reference back to a coaching who worked with a guy called Umar Malik, one of the greatest coaches I've ever met. He's a quiet guy, lives in Leicester, doesn't really post on social media, so you won't have heard of him, but he's one of the best coaches you've never heard of. And he wasn't the greatest admin guy. I'm not always the greatest admin guy. I create systems to make up for my lack of admin skills. But what he did was unbelievably good on the gym floor, which made his clients really love training. And because their clients love training, they followed the diet better because they didn't want to ruin the hard work they'd done in that session. They were asking the questions, they were keen. And because of that, he got away with doing a lot less on the outside stuff because he really created a great environment with that client. And that's ultimately where you want to get to as many clients as possible. They come and train with you because they love Coastal, they love the gym, they love you, they love the way you program. Not because if they don't have you, they're going to fall apart.
Yes.
Going on to a little bit, because we're going into the bodybuilding world. I know recently you have a build program.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that. And where does CrossFit and bodybuilding blend in this for you?
Nice. Well, I'll start with the latter part of your question, because I think that bodybuilding plays a massive role in CrossFit, in the sport. And I think about that from maybe not so much an aesthetic standpoint, although I think about it more from there's two areas I think about it from. Function, which is when you limit yourself to only doing certain movement patterns and certain contractions, the body's just capable of doing so much more. And that's part of what I love about CrossFit, is that something like a bicep curl, which is seen to be an incredibly unfunctional exercise in the CrossFit world, I'm like, you tell me a better way to train your elbow flexors, which doesn't involve your lats in sport CrossFit. There is no way.
Or how much does the long head of the bicep involved in shoulder function?
Yeah.
And how much does an incline bicep curl work in shoulder extension? If you want to get someone ready for a dip, incline bicep curls and decline pressing in your program is going to be a game changer.
Exactly, without having to dip, which is important, right? Because that's the thing, it's if we're just dipping all the time, and that's the only thing, we're going to get potentially run into overuse injuries, we're going to create structural imbalance, and like you said, the bicep curl in all those different variations it's so much more than just getting your biceps bigger or improving your peak.
And it's not a remedial lift either, so
it's
you're
not
hiding it. People are still training their arms.
Right.
It's like a contralateral split squat. You're still training the quads really, really hard, but I'm getting some anti-rotation in there.
Yeah.
And I love, one of my biggest nerdy things to look out for is how do I hide remedial work in my big lifts?
Yeah.
And the point I was going to mention earlier, maybe off on a tangent, I thought it was interesting going on to your talking about almost like progressions and regressions, how you measure progress, and going into a bit of a wormhole with it. I think progressions and regressions in exercises are the biggest, interestingly complicated wormhole. Because I was always taught this, if you went, a back squat is a progression from a hand squat.
Yeah.
Well, is it?
That depends on what you start with: front foot elevated, then floor, then rear foot elevated, then bulk.
Which I absolutely disagree with.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
It's different.
I think high front foot, flat, front foot and rear foot, depending on what you want to challenge. The front foot elevated split squat, the low front foot that everyone does, is a progression one flat. So you go through a greater range of motion, but that's a rant I can go on for an hour and a half.
No, me too.
But
it's different.
It's just different. But I think when you look at that squat comparison, it's is a back squat progression from a hand squat? Well, if your goal is hypertrophy, probably not, because you're just taking away stability.
Yeah.
And if you've got long beamers and you're hip dominant squat, it's probably a terrible exercise.
Yeah.
So if you've got that client that goes, I want a balanced physique, your B series are hacks, your B series are pendulums, your B series are split squats, If I've got a guy's got a hip dominant squat and goes, I want the biggest squat possible, I want that 250 squat you mentioned, or 200 squat you said that you need. Well, I'm going to do a load more glute, hamstring, lower back work because that's going to be the demand. And I just plug the holes.
Yeah.
So progression of regressions, I kind of don't use that term anymore.
I don't. I mean, there can be progressions in terms of like complexity and stability. Skill for sure. But no, I don't. I used to think I was taught. I think Poliquin probably taught us that way, right? That this is you start here and then you move to here, then you move to here. But it's all just so individualized, and it's just context. It's context dependent, right? I think going back to like bodybuilding. So number one, this is where macro cycles and measuring and planning out your year is so important in CrossFit. So our season for most 90% of the world who have not qualified to the next stage of the CrossFit Open, their season's now done. So it's like, what do you do now? Now most gyms are just going to go straight back to 21:59 thrust and pull-ups. But it's like, for me, I'm like, okay, well we haven't done, because the last 24 weeks has been about peaking people for competition. Our training now is going to look very much not like the sport. So now we're going to be doing dumbbell bench pressing. We're going to be doing bicep curls. We're going to be doing tricep extensions. We're doing rear delt work. We're doing leg extensions. We're doing calf raises. It's like, we're doing all that stuff because all the muscle groups, the joints, the range of motion that have been neglected essentially for the last 24 weeks, we've got to bring those things back up again to create some really good foundations. So if I want to get an athlete better at handstand push-ups next year, we're probably going to go through a phase of dumbbell pressing work through different angles, different grips, because that's essentially the same pattern we're going to train, but it just gives me a completely different stimulus, allows me to train the stabilizers more, allows me to be more progressive with load, because if you do a handstand push-up, you've got your body weight and nothing else, unless you put a vest on you. And it just gives me way more training options, and it makes the training journey more fun. So it's like, for me, I think bodybuilding style exercises, and it's like, I even use that term lightly, right? Because when I say bodybuilding, I think a lot of people think, oh, you're just trying to build really big muscles. It's like, well, you're just taking the exercise that bodybuilding world has popularized, that's probably what we see, which is like a lot of isolation, training different patterns of movement, slow controlled tempo, time and attention, using pauses, thinking about strength curves, all that kind of stuff. That's super relevant for CrossFitters. And we've got to think as CrossFitters, this way that I think is that, think outside the box, think outside of just barbells, bodyweight pull-ups, ropes and rings. And kettlebells, like the athlete who can utilize all these other variations of movement, I honestly think is going to be a stronger, more capable, more resilient athlete come competition time. Because at the end of the day, if you're just using a barbell and just training squats to build your quads, like there are so many positions of the quad that you cannot train with a barbell. Yeah. And if I can incorporate hacks, pendulums, leg presses, leg extensions, sled work into an athlete's quad training in the off season, that's a quad muscle that's so much more strong, so much more resilient throughout its entire range of motion. So when I get into a back squat cycle and I need to, that athlete's going to be able to handle more loads. Maybe not immediately, but after a bit of specificity, they're going to crush it.
And I always think podcasts always have this weird tendency to come back full circle. But one of the questions I asked you at the start is about like sort of horror stories and how are you guys different from CrossFit? Yeah. And that is why. That is a breath of fresh air to hear someone who does a lot of programming for a CrossFit gym talk about the importance of isolation. I've heard so many arguments with people who are doing CrossFit saying, why would you leg extensions not functional? The knees function is flexion extension. Yeah. So nothing is more functional than a leg extension. And I think if you can get someone, let's say someone who does a posture assessment, you've now got, if you can get them to get strong in leg extension, get strong in leg curl, get strong in incline hyper, get strong in like more simple squatting patterns. If you bring them all together, all of a sudden you go, well, this might not work, they've never actually squatted, and it's perfect. You never had to teach them about the squat, because you've got all the individual components nailed, it's now just putting them together. Yeah. And it's a tool you wouldn't have, you just like go under the barbell. It's the same equivalent as what I think when people just start tracking macros on day one. It's like trying to learn Spanish by just saying, go to Spain, work it out. Rather than saying, well, here's an app, here's Duolingo, let's work out this thing, let's learn step by step. Training has to be that way. And I think periodization is one of the things that I think most people, it's kind of been like Gen Pop, no point periodizing with Gen Pop because we have different girls going on holiday. I think it's fundamental to allow you to have those priorities to focus on things, and also from a coach's perspective, like the regressions, filtered exercises for you early on. If you now know you're doing a hypertrophy block with someone because people have finished their yearly season, now you've got 3 or 4 months where you know what the rep range is going to be, so you know what exercises are going to best fit it, a hack squat over a back squat might be a better fit for these next 3 months because your goal is hypertrophy. And then when you go back and prepare for the CrossFit games, you go, well, let's get back in the back squat because that's going to be tested. You now know what the rest period is going to be. You now know because you're not going to do 7 sets of 15.
Yeah.
You know, you're not going to do 30 seconds rest between 5 sets of 5. Periodization allows the rest of the program design to be easier, and that's why I often teach it first with people.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think as the CrossFit industry, we don't do this very much. And I think it's just, the laws of specificity, which means that like if you want to be good at a certain thing, you need to do the certain thing. I still totally agree with that. But you can't do specificity all year, every year. And if I'm thinking about the long term as well, because I'll say that this approach that I think I like, which is splitting up the season and doing essentially in the off season less specific work, which honestly every fucking sport does. And then as you get closer to the season, you become more specific. It just extends the longevity of the athlete. And that's something I care quite deeply about. And so what I think a lot of people see when they get exposed to this for the first time, there's not many people do it, I would say, but when they sign up to a CrossFit program and they're doing incline dumbbell bench presses at a 3-1-1 tempo, they're like, when's an incline press ever going to be tested? So the rate of adaptation and progress in the actual sport is probably a bit slower, but the long-term gain is so much greater. And that's the thing, I think about myself, this is how I've trained myself really for the last, I've been doing this sport now for 10 years. And when I think back to 2014 when I first started the sport, and all the guys I was competing against at a good level, none of them are doing it anymore. They all got broken, they're all burnt out, they all found something else because they couldn't make it sustainable. And I'm not saying that I've nailed it, but I came into the sport with 3D reconstructions, foreshortened reconstructions, a lot of like things that were less than ideal. I'm still loving it, and I feel like I can still do this for 10 more years. And I know this approach, and I think this approach that I've taken has allowed me to continually progress from starting at 25 to now being 35. And this is someone, I had 15 years of strength and conditioning background before all of that, so it wasn't like I was getting UV games, So, yeah, I just think about, keeping an athlete, and sorry, to add on top of that, I get so many less injuries now. I've just come out of the competitive season and I feel great. And like I'm just not, and I think back to my early days in CrossFit where it was just getting far too much intensity, not balancing out inside what I was doing inside the gym and outside the gym, but also just doing too much CrossFit essentially, and not doing all the other stuff, which is really important, which I've done my whole life before. I just got really broken, really broken. And that's what I essentially did in CrossFit. I think I came into CrossFit having done 10 years of high-level rugby, really smart strength and conditioning, having a very structurally balanced body. Came into CrossFit, fucked it up a lot for a few years, but it gave me the buffer. It allowed me to handle all the craziness because I'd had that 10 years of smart training. And then after about 2 years, my body was like, okay, now, I started breaking down. And then I just started basically going back to all the basics, getting them back in, and just, that was...
I think cycling your training year is one of the most fundamental skills, I think, that people don't have enough. And it's not just in training. Like in training, as you said, right? You spend too long in a high neurologically demanding phase, like really strength stuff. You're going to see sleep disturbances, you have your general lethargy, just energy issues. If you spend time too long in a high volume phase, or some of these metabolic conditioning stuff and the high rep stuff, you're going to get tendinitis, you're going to get all these little niggly stuff. So periodization, as you spoke about, allows you to have longevity in your training. But then when you start to look a bit deeper at this in terms of most of your clients come for longevity in life and physique and things like this, okay, so let's look at some of the problems that people talk about in terms of nutrition, in terms of metabolic syndrome. If I spend too long in a surplus, right, there's going to be things like testosterone and thyroid going up, that's awesome. But insulin sensitivity over time will go down, you may get issue with lipids and cholesterol, you spend too long in a surplus, you're going to gain some body fat, right? But you'll gain some muscle. In a deficit, it's completely the opposite thing. So when you actually look at nutrition, before people say like, what sort of good food and what's a bad food, should be carnivore or keto, how about cycling your calories? Yeah. Now let's piece it together. You're cycling your training, you're cycling your calories. Oh, okay, what I'm doing this phase, this could also be the time where I cycle my calories up. And then we start peeling another layer further. Let's look at life, right? Most people don't want to feel like they want chicken and broccoli year round. There's going to be times where on the run up to a holiday or first transformation where you're going to be in a deficit. And you get all the good benefits of being in a deficit.
Or in our case, a competition.
Well, yeah, exactly. And then you go into, maybe you get into the summer and you go, well, I've got a good body now, and maybe it's my time to consolidate. So I come up to maintenance, I learned about balance back in, I learned to add a couple of pints of the burger back in, as you mentioned earlier on, And then I come into the winter and I'm like, well, I'm going to be covering myself in clothes. This is the time to build my caloric base. This is the off season that you're going into now. I'm like, well, let's put on some tissue so I can drive my squat at the next competitive season. So when I started putting together the slides for my 16-week mentorship program, and I had to delve into topics that I've got a working knowledge of that I haven't looked at in a number of years, because I'm doing it, my course is different. It's not, here's my biomechanics course. Mine is teach someone who is from beginner to 3-4 years coach. Even some have got some 10-year coaches in there. But like, how do I give you a working knowledge of everything? How I, for ages, thought my disadvantage was I was a jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
Now my biggest skill is that I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. Because I can teach people to have a good working knowledge in everything. But going into these and going deeper than a layer deeper than what my students would need to go through, it made me realise that the links and the similarities behind this, and just a cyclical approach to everything, really is the underpinning of most nutritional issues people face, most training issues people face, most motivation issues people face, comes from that cyclical stuff. And now looking back at my training, I've doubled down on periodization. This is why I like the question about asking about how you do your assessments and how you measure progress, because it's like, I can 100% take stuff from the way you do things, and you will understand the performance side of this way more than I've ever looked into. And I think that's fascinating. And it's interesting to see how your approach is very, very similar to that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally, the whole cyclical approach, like, going 100% at anything is not sustainable. But I do think it's also important to go 100% at things in your life at some point. You know, and that's why, like, personally for me, I love signing up for a competition because it gives me that, like, I've got 3 months now. I'm going to change up my life priorities so that this is going to be the most important thing. Or it's going to go higher up my list at least.
I think CrossFit's good for that as well, right? Because you don't want to be the person that's last. And also, from a physique standpoint, they all have the shirts up and they're all shredded. You know, you said earlier on, I don't know, CrossFit, it's just about performance. Oh, right, because the most performance thing is to be below 10% body fat during this, but they all are. But I think if you've got a deadline that's going to make you be your best in every aspect, CrossFit games is not a bad shout.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like you're also accepting by saying that, okay, now it's not about feeling good. Because I want to spend the majority of my year feeling good. Like, I don't want to have crappy sleepless nights. I want to feel energized. I don't want to have low libido. I want generally all my markers in life for the majority of my year to be high. But when I accept a competition and I'm like, right, the next 3 months I'm gonna knuckle down and train hard for this thing, I'm also saying, right, I'm not expecting those things to be at their highest right now. You know, that's just the cost of admission. The price of admission is that, all right, cool, I'm choosing something physically hard. It's not necessarily the healthiest thing, but this is going to serve me in many other ways, like achievement, accomplishment, seeing what I can physically do, learning about my mental fortitude. And so I think that's an important thing to distinguish as well.
Do you think you sometimes need to go to an unhealthy place to actually be overall healthier? Because I think like getting to ridiculously low levels of body fat isn't necessarily a healthy thing.
Yeah.
But the discipline, the delayed gratification, the skills you have, the resilience you have will make you healthier. Try and push your warm max isn't, but the love for training that you get from doing these things that maybe aren't healthy will actually make you healthier than the person that's trying to be healthy as their goal. Because I see people that now, a lot of people are going to go into Andrew Huberman. I love the guy. Now people's goals become health.
Yeah.
And cool, but like we just said, you can't go 100% on everything. Sometimes I feel people slip into the trap of maintenance mode. You know, it's the people that maintain their physique, right? I'm going to use, I'll use you and your brother as example actually, because by the sound of things, you stay pretty lean and in good shape all year round, right? But I bet you're always pushing hard for something. It's in your training at the very least.
Yeah.
And I think if you enter to it, this is my maintenance block, it's where I'm just going to work on sleep and health. I'm like, would you? Because it's like, that's not exciting. But having a goal to focus on is.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about myself as you were just talking about that, thinking of kind of like, how do I fit into this? But I would say, you know, going back to, you know, the taking it too easy. I'd probably say from a training perspective, I've taken it pretty easy the last 3 years. You know, with that said, like, my body weight's pretty much stayed the same. But my physical capacity right now, what I can actually do with my body is so much more than what I could do 7 months ago, 8 months ago, or even the last 3 years. So yeah, I do definitely.
That's because you have done that in the past and gone.
It's because I have, yeah.
You built the foundations.
Yeah, and I do 100% think that it is such a tough dichotomy that I think about a lot. It's like, if you do hard things, is that taking away from health or is that actually contributing towards health? But then it's like, well, what is health? I think sometimes I think about health as like, okay, the person who lives the longest and who's like capable with their body until they're 100. But then I'm also like, it's not really, maybe that's not what everything health should be. Is it about blood markets? Is it about the physical function of my body? And then it's like, what about all the other great things that come from doing hard things?
I think that physical function for what? Yeah. Right? Like your bodybuilder. Does it matter if I don't have great overhead range? No. If my goal is to go into a CrossFit Open, I've got to press overhead. Yes. Yeah. But if I just want to feel good and be out of pain and I spend most of my time being a lawyer, then, well, can you be healthy with less?
Yeah. It's like, okay, I want to be mobile, but do I want to do the splits? I'm like, no, I don't care enough about the splits to put in the work that I know I need to be able to do to do the splits. So right now, the standards that I'm using for what I should be able to do is a sport CrossFit. And that means I have to be able to do an overhead squat. I need to be able to touch my toes. There's loads of things I have to do. That's what I love about it, because the sport requires mobility. And before I came to CrossFit, I was the tightest man ever. And so it was something I had to really, really work towards.
I would say I currently beat you.
I was pretty tight, mate.
Oh, mate,
can you overhead squat?
Absolutely not. Not at all.
Okay, maybe you would.
Yeah, like we can test this. So you want a YouTube video, but you can laugh at me. You want to go out and see how badass.
But to be fair though, I was pretty tight, probably not far off you, but then I chose a sport which requires aggressive ranges of motion. So there was a lot of work to be done. And so probably because of where I started, has made me really love the idea of like becoming more mobile.
Well, that's where our paths separate, right? Because I think for you found the sport that made you mobile. For me, I had, as I said early on with the breathwork stuff, I had the disadvantages. But then when I had that choice to go into become more mobile, I went down and I'm not hating on it, because RTS I think is one of the best things that's happened to personal trainers, thinking about mechanics and working with the individual rather than everyone squat, bench, dead, bar should touch your chest, that kind of stuff. But the problem when you teach something, the person teach it, you have a bit Chinese whispers, it goes down, and the people were giving me advice were 4 rungs down from this. So I got to the point where I worked around everything. So I probably got tighter because I just never got myself stronger at these end ranges. And then fast forward 5-6 years, I'm like, oh, I've got to undo 5-6 years.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where I am now with the changing priorities. Like, oh, right, I need a new challenge. My mobility has shifted up my priority list compared to just looking good on a photo shoot.
Yeah.
Whereas 5-6 years ago, I don't care if I get big overhead. I'll just wait to be limbo process.
Yeah, I think that's how I feel. It's like I'm always seeking challenge and growth, right? So it's like I don't think I ever accomplished or completed anything. I didn't complete the bodybuilding game, but it was just like I'm just ready for a new challenge now, And that's going back to cycling and training. It's like when the off season comes around, I'm kind of excited to see how much muscle I can put on. So I'm going to take more of a hypertrophy bodybuilding approach for the next 3 months. And I'm going to just not really care about function at all. I don't care about aerobic fitness. I don't care about my mobility. And then I'll probably finish that and be like, okay, what do I focus on next? I want to get back to snatching and a bit of lifting. That means I'm going to have to work on my shoulders and improve my range of motion a little bit there. So that becomes a bit of the focus. And that's kind of what I like. I like having these different goals. And I competed in a high rocks competition. And I was like, well, what do I need to be good at for high rocks? I don't need to put anything in my head. I don't need to squat other than doing a few wall balls. I don't need to hinge. So I'm just going to do a crap load of running and build up my aerobic system and probably get pretty tight through my lower extremities in the process. But that doesn't matter because that's going to be my focus. And I know I've got enough training consistency over the years past and I have the tools to know what I need to do to get back there. So that's cool. This next 3 months is just going to be about this speed target. And I'm going to do the same this November. I'm going to probably finish this season. I've got another stage to go. Then I'm probably going to go through a bit of a bodybuilding phase. I'm going to probably do some other sports like play tennis and football on a Saturday and do other things where it's just going to be about moving and exploring my body and what else I can do. Then I'll probably do high rocks. And then the new year will roll around and I'll be like, right, let's get CrossFit fit again. And I'll probably do a little 3-month phase of just like doing loads of CrossFit. And that for me is like, I can look at that year and be like, that's fun. Like at no point am I looking at it being like, oh, that's going to be draining. Oh, I'm going to get bored of that. It's like, I've got these little 3-month periods or I can have these so I guess answering your question, which you asked before, now I'm kind of figuring out the answer, which is like staying lean all year. It's probably because I've always got some athletic endeavour I'm working towards throughout the year. They're just different. So yeah, there will be periods of the year where you probably can't tell, but I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm a kilogram heavier in terms of muscle mass here. I'm a bit leaner here, I'm a little bit more ripped. So I'm more or less always around 83 to 86 kilograms. And most people probably can't tell the difference.
And going back to the same thing you said earlier on about trying to improve people not wanting to gain muscle as much as they think they do, and just having that, just wanting not to get fat.
Yeah.
This is how you do it. And it's finding something that keeps you mentally stimulated, assessing progress, having a different goal, having priorities. So if you can get to the year and you love the process of training, you don't want to ruin that because you're working hard to something in the gym floor, so you just tend to eat a bit better than you would have done, then you end up with that long-term physique.
And I also think, sorry to jump in, is that we've probably both done the same thing where we've done way too much of one thing and got probably really burnt out from it. So like, whilst it's great for us to sit here and say like, find a way to balance your year and cycle out different priorities, but keep physical movement as the core of your life, which is I think how we both feel. But it's like you've also got to overdo it sometimes. Like you've got to mess yourself up. You've got to do things where you realise actually that's not what I want to do anymore. I've got to change and find a new approach, because that's what I did. I first started CrossFit. I just went all in. I went so deep into it for 2 to 3 years. I just got so broken and burnt out. And I was like, there's got to be another way of doing this. And that's kind of how I arrived at the way I do it now.
I think people are scared of going backwards as well, right? So I think the problem is sometimes when people, let's say, use bodybuilding example. I put on all this muscle, and I don't want to lose this muscle. So I'm going to keep hammering that bodybuilding thing. And what you've just, there's two things you've kind of just shown in that episode. One is that, you kind of go into different things and you don't really lose much muscle at all. Maybe a kilo, and you can put that back on.
Yeah.
So the actual, as long as you're doing something, it's easier to maintain it than to gain it in the first place. And sometimes taking one step backwards will allow you to take 4 forward. Yeah. I always use this in strength. I've had a couple of phases with girls. I had a couple of girls who could do like 150 kilo deadlifts. And one of them, their big sticking point was they were struggling to hold their upper back tight. So when in a phase which is a 10-second eccentric. Now if you looked at that from a total volume perspective, that sounds like a huge backward step. But because she controlled every inch, when I put 120 kilos back on the bar, she now could, and I brought the tempo down to 1-2 seconds on the way down, all of a sudden she could control much more weight. I had a girl that her sticking point, mentally, she was just getting freaked out by picking up that weight at around about the 125 mark. So I was like, well, what can I do? She's probably gone down the neurological stimulus too much, so she's nervous, it's a bit fried, she's freaking out about it, all this sort of stuff. I did a block of EDT, escalated density training, which is essentially net control. Deadlift 6 reps, incline press 6 reps, 20 minutes on the clock, many rounds you can. Again, accumulated a lot of volume, but in terms of intensity, massive drop off. But then when I put 130 on the bar, walk up, pick it up, because you got so used to walking and picking it up.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing here. So if you're really burnt out from bodybuilding, the best way to become a better bodybuilder is take 3 months off bodybuilding. So then when you come back to it, you come into it with a much more level of enthusiasm, which means you train harder, and essentially if your goal is to build tissue, training close to failure is the aim of the game no matter what you do. So if you're so burnt out that you're kind of rushing your sessions, you look at the clock, you're getting out the door, you need to take a step back. Otherwise, you'll probably spend the next year not building any muscle whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think there's such a big psychological component to it. And if you chase an adaptation for too long, then it can actually just be your mind that's stopping you progressing any further. And sometimes just deload weeks, deload periods, just changing things up completely, taking the focus completely off that goal you're striving for, and then sometimes just throwing it in one day, being like, all right, let's see if you can do it. Suddenly they can do it. They kind of completely forgotten about all the mental blocks they previously had, and they suddenly just are able to do it.
I had a great story of that as well. I had a client who I was teaching we had a seminar at PT recently, and we were talking about how to progress to chin-ups. And the reason why I don't like eccentric chin-ups, because it's like saying I want to get a better bench press by doing 110% of my 1 rep max on the bench press. And I was like, just get good at pull downs.
Yeah.
If you get good at pull downs, bring your body weight down. If you do your body weight for 8 to 10 reps, you'll do a chin-up.
Yeah.
You can do all this fancy stuff later on, take it from 1 to 5, but just be simple. Never trained this girl I was working with for 2 years to do a chin-up. And we did a photo shoot, and after our first year, and the photographer says, oh, can you do a chin-up? So I don't think so. I was like, okay, jump up, I'll hold you there, and then you get some snaps. She jumped to hold there, she was holding there for 5 minutes, no problem at all. So she comes in the next time, I want to see if you can do a chin-up. Never ever trained it, never even tried it. And she was like, oh, well, I won't be able to do it. I'm like, well, you held yourself there for so long, I reckon you can. She banged out like 9. Never, we just got her strong at the basics.
Yeah.
And then we're like, okay, well now you can do this. And I think that it's such a psychological component, but also it doesn't, for any coach listeners, programming doesn't need to be complicated. The basics really, really, really do.
That's why CrossFit gyms should have a cable pull down machine, by the way.
I agree, and yet I've never seen one. I'm presuming that your gym is going to be the first.
We have one, yeah. course.
Of course, there we go. And that is another breath of fresh air. Bicycles, leg extension, the cable pull down.
Yeah, so we've got a cable column, cable row, pull down, leg extension, ham curl, and a leg press. And I mean, I would love so much more, trust me, like there is so much more I would love. I would love to have just a fully decked out Atlantis bodybuilding gym and a CrossFit gym next door.
I was at a gym in London that's literally, it's like 2 warehouses next to each other, and literally one side was CrossFit and one side was complete awesome bodybuilding equipment.
That's the dream.
And I'm like, that is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly, and that's how I would love to be able to run group classes in a bodybuilding style gym.
Yeah.
That would be so sick.
Yeah. I think we've gone through a lot of programming stuff now, and we said this is an episode where it's going on both shows. Like, we weren't sure how to start this episode. How do we end it? Like, I'll say, where do people find out about you? But like, this is your building. So for people who are listening on my show, and they can see this amazing setup we've got here, we've talked about how good your CrossFit gym is. Tell us about the process program, tell us about Coastal, tell us about what you offer, and do your plug.
Yeah,
do your own show.
Cool. So best place to find me, I think probably be Instagram at Ed_Haynes_coach. This is so weird me saying this because it's not in my podcast.
I know. I'm going to give you a huge compliment here though, by the way. I think your branding on Instagram is absolutely superb.
Oh, thanks, mate.
Like, for a while, like, looking, it's like, this guy's got, like, it stands out, it looks super professional. Like, again, if you're listening to this being part of the Process podcast, then you're going to go, shut up, son, I know this. If you listen to my podcast and not followed Ed on Instagram, go follow Ed on Instagram, because it's really, I've learned a lot about CrossFit training from it. So definitely a shout out to that.
Oh, thank you so much.
But what's the handle? Because I interrupted you before you
said. Sorry. So it's Ed_Haynes_coach.
Yeah.
I just really appreciate the compliment, and I don't think we show each other love enough in this world. So thank you very much.
My podcast is very commonly a shout out platform.
Nice.
The amount of people I shout out is absolutely ridiculous.
That's awesome. Good job. So obviously we have a podcast, the Process podcast. I will be found probably here most of my time at Coastal Fitness in Hong Kong, North Point. We have an online coaching platform called the Process Programming. We work with individuals and groups. Our main programs are CrossFit orientated, so we have different levels within that, and we have our build program, which is really to look good, feel good, function well. That's the priorities of it. So kind of like a hybrid between a bodybuilding and a CrossFit program, I would say. What else? I think that's about it, to be honest.
You have apparel as well, right?
So we have apparel here. So we did used to have an apparel company, and we've recently just put that on pause.
Okay.
The pandemic made that tough.
Yes.
And we had loads of beautiful, elaborate plans. Learned a ton. Don't regret any of it. But for the time being, the focus is going to be Coastal Process.
Nice. If you do open that again, I will definitely go and buy a t-shirt.
Awesome. Right?
Again, very well branded, I would say.
Thank you.
Truly an entrepreneur, researching you for the podcast with a gym and an online program, and the branding company and apparel. I'm wondering what else is coming next over the next couple of years.
Yeah,
big things.
That's an interesting one. I think, the reason I said yes to the apparel company, it was actually a friend of mine, one of our members, who pitched the idea to me, and I was like, I don't know anything about apparel, if I'm honest. I wouldn't even really say I'm a fashionable guy, but I'm like, this is going to be cool. I get to now start a new business, having run a business now for 12 years. I'm going to probably do this completely differently to how I set up Coastal.
How many years old?
Yeah, this is with 14 years now.
That's amazing.
Yeah, pretty crazy. So I'm like, I'd love to take those lessons of running a business for that long and see what I would do if I set something new up. And I'm just going to learn something. That's really why I came into it, just to be like, this is a great opportunity to learn. But throughout that process, what became really obvious to me is really what my passion is, which is coaching and educating. That's really that's my flow state. I know it's your flow state as well. It's like what I get so much fulfillment doing. And so, my biggest takeaway from that lesson was I want to go all in on what I'm doing right now. And if I'm going to say yes to projects, I need to be a 9 out of 10. Like we talked about with our clients. Yeah. And I wasn't a 9 out of 10. And so therefore it's a good learning curve. I shouldn't have said yes to that. But I'm very happy I did, because it's made me now realise you've got to pick and choose your battles wisely. You've only got so many resources to put in every day. Right now, I would genuinely say that everything that I do in my job, whether it's with Coastal Fitness or it's Process Programming or it's this podcast, I genuinely love. There is nothing I dread or don't look forward to, and that's a pretty cool place to be, because as coaches, as entrepreneurs, as business owners, there's a lot of time spent doing things you don't like. Like you said, you'd be a shit accountant. Like, I was a terrible accountant for so many years, and now accounting is not my job description anymore.
Yeah.
So do things that you love. That's very much where I'm at.
I agree with that. Couldn't agree more.
And let me flip the question back to you, Simon. Tell me about you and where people can find you.
So the main thing is probably Instagram, which should be at Kingsley Dutton, as we spoke about before we came on air. My name is Simon, but Kingsley is my middle name, so I don't sound too Jamaican. But at Kingsley Dutton on Instagram, easy to find. That's where you find most of the stuff about me. I also have a podcast as well for the people who are listening on the other side of the coin, which is the Self-Made Podcast, which you'll find links to on my Instagram, as well as on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and wherever you like to get your platforms. Even at Pandora, I have a podcast platform. Didn't know that was the case. But yeah, and that is absolutely my pride and joy. You know, I said about the podcast before we clicked record that it was a passion project for multiple years. And now, with an upcoming move back to the UK in June, maybe a little bit more spare time on my hands, it's going to be a massive focus on where I go moving forward. So they're sort of the main things about me. And as regards to anyone who wants to, you know, if anyone likes what I've been chatting about and don't think this guy is an absolute annoying moron, I run a 16-week coaching confidence course, which there are 2 to 3 intakes a year. The next one will be in the summer, which is a 16-week course that teaches you all the working knowledge of everything you need to be a great coach, as well as one-to-one mentoring. We've also just launched a self-paced course via HIT PT, where I work here in Hong Kong, which is going to be literally a level 1 of teaching coaches. We're going to do a level 2 and a reverse dieting one, is the aim before I leave Hong Kong. So that's going to be other courses that we can look at. And if you're in Hong Kong and you want to train maybe for bodybuilding rather than the CrossFit side of this, I'm at HIT PT in central Hong Kong, and that's where I do all my one-to-one. So that, essentially, I do a lot of stuff. But that's in a nutshell.
Yeah, I do just want to say, you know, in return, like, you know, I think you do some great stuff on social media as well. And I would say, you guys over at HIT PT are just doing some fantastic stuff. I mean, James has been on the podcast as well, and then Josh, and just everything I see you guys do is super legit. And
I say I'm a big shout out podcast, but like hands down, by the way, for talking about my friend Umar is one of the best, smartest people you'll not know. James Campion is one of the nicest dudes I've ever met in the industry. Yeah. And he deserves all the praise and credit in the world for what he's created. Both him and the rest of the team, Josh, Karen in the works, and Kevin has done a really good job as well. But like, I've never been in an environment where it's so friendly and so welcoming. And James is a huge part of that. So literally, if you're in Hong Kong, come and check out Coastal. This gym is absolutely amazing. Come and check out HIT. Both gyms are incredible environments. Definitely worth it.
Simon, on behalf of the President Podcast, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the idea, for reaching out. Really enjoyed the conversation. I knew I would. And I'm sure we're going to stay connected for many moons to come.
Well, as I said, like I love chatting programming with people. It's one of my favourite topics, and you don't see that much in Hong Kong. I followed your work for a while. I'm like, how have I not actually had a proper conversation with this guy? Considering I followed on Instagram probably since I just moved to Hong Kong. So it's been an absolute pleasure. You are as smart on the topic as I thought you were, which is always good to see. So thank you for the invite.